Not on BBC One, I hope.
You never know. I mean, you never know.
That would be a surprise. Everyone tuning in for Boris gets us.
I think you should have a double screening.
Or record it. We're recording it.
Yeah, so am I. But we'll see it on the
We're
news
watching
tomorrow.
it.
Okay.
Dan tell us she's watching it.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone, to Chasing Lullabies and the season finale of this, which is our actual second season, though it is the first book of the Torah. It's the first book of Bereshit, and so we have come, I think, to our final session on Bereshit, on our final session on Genesis, and we will continue after the next book of the Torah with season 3, which will be the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra. So I have a little break for a couple of months. I want to pull back the zoom lens as we begin to ask some of the fundamental questions which really underpin Chasing Lullabies and approach this whole book of Genesis that we've been dealing with in a grand way, which will then lead us to a resolution of the different strands that we've been putting together over the past month or two, and then finally sort of ask or address maybe some of these big questions. I think, any person reading Genesis has to be struck by a question, which is, what is the point? What is the point of the book of Genesis? Meaning, it's very nice to read about history of patriarchs, matriarchs, sibling rivalry, creation of the world even, floods and foes. It's all very, very wonderful to read these things, and it is they're the topics of fairy tales and lullabies alike. But what's the point? Why begin the book like this? What's the message that is meant to be the introduction to the whole Jewish story, to the story of our holy book? It's not just the introduction to a Jewish story, but so many other millions of people use this book, use our Chumash, our holy Torah, as the beginning as the beginning to their holy works. Why this? And in actual fact, this question isn't just asked by us here tonight. This question was asked by the great commentators. Why begin with the beginning? If the Torah is a book of a guide to life, I think Helen and Harvey once suggested that the Torah is a guide to life. So if the Torah is a guide to life, just start with the Jewish people. Start with where we begin as a nation and the mission that we have in the giving of the Torah. How do these stories do anything? How do we lift the stories off the page away from simply being a story, a fairy tale, a lullaby, and into something which is the fundamental introduction to the entire picture of what it means to be a Jew? And how do I feel about that? How do I feel about the message that the book of Genesis is trying to create within me? Essentially, what I'm asking is, if we're really going to chase away the lullabies and fairy tales, and we're really going to address this book of the Torah in a new way, in an adult way, in a way that speaks to the heart of my life, that has meaning for me right now, right here in 2020, 2021 even. So, Happy New Year. So if it's going to speak to me, then what do these messages tell us? Because we've been looking at all these textual parallels. This story is an echo of that story, is an echo of that story. But what's the point? So that's the overarching question I want to hold above our heads. And I want to address it when we get to the end of today's exploration. In the meantime, though, I'm going to remind us of where we were up to and what the job is that we have to do this evening. Up till now, we saw recurring themes and patterns throughout the entire book of Genesis. We saw creation stories abound. We saw the creation story of Adam, the creation story of Noah, the creation story of Abraham, even the creation story of Jacob, where we found creation in the somewhat obscure but becoming less so story and episode of the Teraphim, those little divining tools, Laban's crystal ball, his mystic meg apparatus that his daughter Rachel stole, and so as a result was condemned to death. We saw, though, that Jacob's life was also split into 3 key episodes: a Jacob and Esau goats and coats episode, where Jacob tricks his brother Esau and steals the birthright. Sorry, Jacob tricks his father Isaac and brother Esau and steals the birthright. We saw another critical episode of Jacob meeting Rachel, and a final critical episode, that episode we just mentioned, the teraphim, the divining instrument of Laban stolen by Rachel. And we saw that these 3 episodes would then recur. They would recur in the life of Judah, and they will also recur in the life of Joseph and his brothers. And we saw how they recurred and how, in essence, Jacob was unable to end this cycle, this endless Groundhog Day cycle, because there was an exit point before he was able to face up to his own truth telling and become the person who could look himself in the face straightforwardly and own up to his contribution to brotherly strife. Before he was able to resolve his dispute with his brother Esau, his wife already plunged them into a repeat cycle by stealing the teraphim. And so we saw the teraphim saga and the Jacob saga. Of those 3 stories, Jacob and Esau, goats and coats, the second one, Jacob meeting Rachel, and the third one of the teraphim repeat themselves across the Judah and Tamar story. That Judah and Tamar had these repeated themes, and then finally Judah was able to escape by owning up to his involvement with Tamar, by admitting his foibles and mistakes and breaking the cycle, breaking the deadlock. And then what we were going to do this week was finish off the story by seeing echoes of the teraphim, echoes of these divining instruments, not just in the Judah and Tamar story, but also in the Joseph and his brothers story, and see how the Joseph and his brothers story connects to the Judah and Tamar story to finally end the cycle. That's what we're going to do tonight. And then we're going to answer the big question: what's this book of Genesis? How does it speak to me right now? We'll start to give some answers, some thought to that question too. But just a thought to begin with. We've spoken about Groundhog Day, the idea that a certain theme or event can repeat itself over and over again until it's finally fixed. What's the concept that we're really dealing with here? You know, sometimes we say, when a person has passed away, we say, we're doing something in the merit of this person. What does it mean to do something in the merit of this person? What does it mean to relive our forebears? I think you could think about it as having an opportunity, not just to remember them, not just an opportunity to do a mitzvah with them in mind, but an opportunity to redeem, to change, and to thereby purify some of the actions of the past. This might sound like a strange idea. The way that my mind grasps onto it, for obvious reasons, is that in the sort of traditional psychotherapy world, we often say that we either repeat the mistakes of our parents or do the opposite of our parents. So I'm seeing a few nods already when I say that, but we either repeat or we do the opposite, and both is essentially an extreme, right? Imagine if a person has a very angry parent. So often that then when they become a parent, they can either themselves become consumed with rage, just as they were witnessed someone else who was raging, or they can become entirely passive with no sense of anger at all, an entirely permissive parent with no boundaries, etc. Either one is going to be a poor parent. A totally angry parent is going to just create an environment of unhappiness and tension. A totally permissive parent is going to create a brat. So what is necessary to actually fix the mistakes of the past, to do something in the memory of someone, but to fix the past in their memory, is to actually take on the lessons of the past, but make a change, but make a substantive change. And actually doing the opposite is not a change, it's just the other extreme of the same coin. It's the other side of the same coin. Whereas the alternative is to do something different. And what we see, I think, in the Groundhog Day saga of of Adam's legacy in the first creation being passed on to Noah, being passed on to Abraham, being passed on to Jacob, being passed on to Judah, being passed on to Joseph, is an attempt, seemingly a theme through the Torah, of people grappling with the same idea and either repeating, doing the opposite, or finding a way out. Can we find a way out from the repeated pattern? I suppose as a psychotherapist, I have to believe we can, because otherwise we're just watching the same mistakes repeat themselves generation after generation after generation. But also as a Jew, I have to believe that they can, because I believe that we've got free will, and that despite the inputs that we have and the challenges that we have, maybe we can meet them with slightly more wisdom, grace, and strength than our forebears. And in so doing, we will redeem the mistakes of the past and change the future. With that in mind, let's jump into some text. Okay. So here we are. We are going to start actually at the beginning of last week's parasha, which is the beginning of Vayigash. Okay, Genesis 44:18. And the first thing I want to start to do is to map out the yellows and then the greens. Okay, and just to put us into the picture of where we're up to, Vayigash begins right in the middle of the Joseph story. We're thick in the action because the brothers have come down to Egypt. Joseph has recognized them, but they have not recognized him. By the way, that's quite a theme, isn't it? Recognizing, not recognizing, recognizing a coat that was dipped in blood, but not recognizing that it was actually a decoy from what really happened. Recognizing that this is my son, but not recognizing which son it is, as Esau and Jacob are sort of trading places in front of Isaac. So recognizing and not recognizing is a definite theme, and it's actually a textual theme as well, that the same words are used each time. But they've come down and they stood in front of their brother Joseph. He's recognized them, they haven't recognized him, and they've come for food. And there's been a whole to-do that Joseph has accused them of being spies. He's taken Shimon captive, and then he sent them back to Daddy Isaac, saying that unless they bring back proof of their story, what's the proof of their story? That there is another brother, his name is Benjamin. Then unless they bring back Benjamin, so Shimon will be lost in captivity, and they will never have all the food that they need. So they go back to Father Isaac, and now Isaac, is he willing to let go of Benjamin? At first, no. Why? Well, you know, this man Jacob, he's been through quite a lot. He had a beloved wife, the wife of his dreams. He was cheated out of her, had to work for many, many years. Eventually, finally, she gave birth to a son, his beloved Joseph. Then she dies in childbirth with Benjamin. He loses Joseph. He's got nothing left from her. All he's got is Benjamin. Is he willing to let Benjamin go? Absolutely not. And it's only when Judah says, I was stuck like you were stuck. We talked about this already. I was stuck like you were stuck. I was stuck not giving up my third son, my son Shelah, to Tamar. And it was a collateral that helped me out of my situation, a collateral payment that allowed me to stand up and admit to my true responsibility in the Yehuda and Tamar story scandal. So a collateral is what's going to help you out of your situation. I will be collateral for your son, Benjamin. So they go down, they take Benjamin with them. They try to demonstrate to Joseph, who they don't know is Joseph still, that their story was bona fide, and they release Shimon. But now Joseph takes matters into his own hands. And Joseph takes his silver goblet and puts it into Benjamin's pack. And this is where we have and put them into Benjamin's pack and lets them go, and then runs after them and says, "You thieves, you stole my goblet. Now I'm going to take Benjamin away from you." And let's start to hear some echoes of Eden. So Judah stands up and he says, look, we have this old father. Here we are in verse 20 with the yellow highlighting over here. Ignore the pink, ignore the blue, ignore the green. Just look at the yellow to start with. And it says that this boy, this Benjamin, he's the child of our father's old age. It's his youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him. Vayivaterhu levado. He himself, he is left alone. Where else have we heard someone being left alone in the Torah? Someone who is unhappily alone. Think back to the very beginning.
Adam.
Adam, fantastic. So scrolling down to the bottom of the page to my networks. So Genesis 2:24. Vayomer Hashem Elokim Lo Tov Heyos Ha'adam Levado. Genesis 2:18. The Lord God said, "It's not good for man to be alone. I'll make a fitting helper for him." So God says, "It's not good for a man to be alone." And here, Jacob is described as being alone because he doesn't have Benjamin. That's the first. Now, okay, maybe that's one comparison. Is there any other comparisons to Genesis? Well, the next yellow, he says, "Vayomer el Adoni." We said to my Lord, "Lo yuchal hana'ar la'azov es aviv." The child cannot leave. The boy cannot leave his father. He can't leave. Where else do we have a situation of someone leaving their host, leaving their family as they combat their loneliness? Well, we go back to Genesis, and that's what we have in Genesis 2:24. As a result of a person getting married, this is after Eve is created, hence a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. A man leaves his father and comes to his wife. So we have now two comparisons to Genesis. We have the moving away from my family and also the inappropriateness of being alone. But there's also someone else, now green, who is left alone. It's not just Jacob who is left alone. Sorry, it's not just Benjamin who is left alone, is the last one for his father. It's not just Adam who is left alone without his helpmeet. There was one other person who's left alone one dark, dark night as he's facing possibly certain death at the hands of his murderous brother, and has a night where he is alone battling his demons. Who is that?
Jacob, Yaakov.
That's right, that's Jacob. So that's the language over here in the green. Yivater Yaakov Levado in Genesis 32:25, that Jacob was left alone that dark night. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And that man, we sort of thought maybe that was his own. He was wrestling with himself. He was wrestling with his sense of identity. Can he be a straightforward person, or will he always be crooked? So we've seemed to have some interesting connections here. Connections between Judah standing up to defend Benjamin. The way that Benjamin is described is linked to Eden, and that's also linked somehow to Jacob. So if we go back to our graph, our sort of visual map of what we were trying to achieve all together. So we've already mapped out Adam's world, Noah's world, Abraham's world, Jacob's world, with 4 creation stories. How Jacob's world is split into 3 goats and coats, Jacob's marriage to Rachel, the Teraphim, how those 3 have expression in Judah's world. We've got that expression also coming up in Joseph and the brothers' world. But here, so far, we have a triangle of connections between Adam's world. Adam, it's not good for him to be alone, and he's left alone. He's left alone, he leaves his parents' house just as Benjamin is being ripped from his parents' house. We have a connection to Jacob and Esau and the battle between Jacob and Esau as Jacob is left alone to fight his demons before meeting Esau. And we have a connection with the Joseph and brothers story, to teach us something about Benjamin and Benjamin's relationship with Jacob. What is this triangle? What's the common theme? Adam being alone, Jacob and Esau, Jacob battling with himself, Benjamin, the leftover remnant of Rachel. What do you see as the common denominator amongst these three ideas? Once again, Adam finding Eve, Jacob fighting his demons, and Benjamin being the last scion of Rachel. What do you see in these three ideas? A concept that is sort of waving its way through this triangle. Might as well throw out a suggestion. Anthony.
The progress of mankind coming through Bereshit.
Okay, progress in what sense?
You started at Adam, who's the first man. You're coming through, and now we're getting with Benjamin. He is the last link before we go down to Egypt and we get the Exodus.
Okay, so that there's a chronological progression, but what is the thematic idea that might be repeating itself, almost like a Groundhog Day, in these three ideas? Someone who is lonely, right, and lonely, but then possibly after they battle this or they grapple with this issue, what's the opposite of lonely?
With other people.
That they're whole, maybe, that they're whole. Not just that they have a companion, but that there is a fulfillment, there's a wholeness, there's a completion. So Adam is incomplete when he is without a helpmeet, when he's without Eve. Adam is lost. And so then God says, it's not good for you to be alone. So let me complete you. Let me find you your soulmate. Jacob is also split. He's split between an identity that is not really appropriate for him, an identity that is not straightforward, an identity that makes him crooked. And that night where he is left alone, he battles that identity and comes out whole. Actually, it says after the meeting with Esau that he goes to Shechem, Shalem, he goes whole. He goes Shalem. Now, Shalom means peace, but Shalem means whole, because to be in peace means to be whole, to be absolutely whole, because he's battled his demons and he's won. It's that sort of dream of every person, that the edges of our personality, we not only sort of live alongside them, but we heal them and we come out whole. And that's the same idea with Benjamin, that Benjamin is the final wholeness of Jacob. That Jacob had this wonderful wife, his dream girl, his Rachel. He's lost Rachel, he's lost Joseph, and all he's got is Benjamin. And so there's this idea of completion coming through. Before I expand upon that anymore, I just want to share with you a few more connections, because so far it's only a few textual connections that have linked this story of Joseph and his brothers, both with Adam's world in terms of the loneliness and the leaving, and also with the Jacob and Esau story of being left alone. I want to show you along this axis of the triangle connections between Adam's world and the Jacob fighting his demons and Jacob and Esau. So over here, a few connections. Esau was given animals to identify. Esau was sent gifts by Jacob, and he didn't know, like, they kept on coming. He didn't know where they're all coming from. And eventually, it turns out that they're from his brother, sending him a present. Adam was also given animals to identify. He was given animals to name. This was actually part of the process of Adam finding a mate. Was God said, it's not good for Adam to be alone. Well, let's put all the animals in front of him and see if they're appropriate. And it turns out that it's actually not appropriate to marry an elephant or a hippopotamus or a giraffe. It turns out, but he gave each one a name as he turned as he turned down each one. That's the first connection between Adam's world and the Jacob and Esau story. The next connection is in Genesis 32:32. It says, "Vayizrach lo hashemesh ka'asher avars punuel v'hu tzoleya al yireichai." So after this battle with the angel, whoever that angel was, it says that it turned out that Jacob was tzoleya al yireichai. We translate that as he was limping on his hip. This word tzoleya, he was limping. It sounds very much like a different word that appears in the creation story. What's that word? God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. He fell asleep. He took a tzello. He took a rib from Adam. Oh, that's so interesting. The same word used to describe the limping hip of Jacob is the same word used to describe the rib that is extracted from Adam to create Eve. What are we learning here? We're learning that these are all stories of completion, of finding completion. And what's the completion ultimately for Benjamin? The completion ultimately for Benjamin is in Genesis 45:14. With that, he, Joseph, embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Finally, blood brothers come together after long years apart. Finally, Joseph has found his brother. Esau and Jacob come together and they are whole. Adam and Eve come together and they are whole. Finally, Joseph and Benjamin, ripped apart by the machinations of the other brothers, ripped apart by this long arm of Laban that has come and has repeated itself, this Groundhog Day, finally they come together and they're able to cry on each other and hold each other. And so going back to that triangle is a triangle of echoes of completion, finding some solace in a world that has been rendered apart.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I can't remember, but what was the Esau and Jacob bit about crying on the neck? Or?
Very good, absolutely. So Jacob and Esau also, they cry on each other's necks, and so that's again another textual connection between this verse over here talking about Benjamin and Joseph crying each other's necks, and Esau and Jacob crying each other's necks. There is a happy reunion. Very good, excellent connection. Thank you, Stephen.
With Esau, it wasn't happy crying. It wasn't the same thing.
We're not sure. It's interesting because there's these dots on top of the letters over there. Like there's a couple of places in the Torah where there are little dots on top of the word, and they come to tell us that not everything is as it seems. So you're right that there is a certain tension when it comes to Esau and Jacob's reunion.
I'm finding the Benjamin part of the triangle quite difficult to fit in. It's a bit tenuous in my mind at the moment.
I think
the completeness.
The idea here about Benjamin is that fitting Benjamin into the puzzle is that if we're trying to fulfill the curse, that was leveled against Rachel. It was said that Jacob said to Laban, his father-in-law, he said, anyone who's got these teraphim, anyone who's got these divination instruments, so they shall surely die. So if you're going to kill off Rachel, it's not enough to kill off Rachel. You have to kill off Joseph and you have to kill off Benjamin. So Benjamin he's part of this whole story of Benjamin's part of this whole story of Rachel and Rachel's ending. And so when he's the last bit left, but he's not really, because Joseph is still there. And since Joseph is still there, there is some way for the children of Rachel to once again come together. And the way that it's described, the way he is described in terminology that is like the emptiness of Adam. Adam is left alone and he has to leave his parents' house. Benjamin is also positioned in this Eve-like way. So there's not much that he says, but there's a lot that the text says about him. So I think that's where we're kind of coming to on that one, Stephen.
What about Benjamin's, is it 11 sons? 12, I think it's 11 sons that go down to Egypt. I mean, not only is Jacob losing Benjamin when he stays in Egypt, but he's leaving his family behind, a very, very big family.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, they all of the brothers had kids when lots of kids, you know, Jewish families.
But Benjamin had most.
Benjamin had lots. Yes, it's true. It's true. I think I will just we'll roll with that one for a second, because I have another question which is sort of connected, Jonathan, but moving us slightly on, which is, hold on a second, what about Judah? What about Judah? We've worked out the Rachel's children side of the issue. We've solved their reunion. We've given them the status of Adam and Eve. We've brought them back together, thank God. But we haven't actually brought the whole family back together. We've still got Judah and the other brothers who were part of the plot to get rid of Joseph. How do they all fit in? So for that, we need to go back to the top and back to Teraphim. So now that we're going to ignore the yellows and the greens, and we're going to go and do some blues and purples. And we're going to rewind slightly in our reading of the Torah. And we're now going to look at some textual similarities between the description of chasing after the brothers who don't know that there has been something hidden in their packs, and the Teraphim story where Rachel had something hidden in her pack. Already, by the way, that's a big similarity, right? Just think about it. The brothers have a golden chalice that has been stolen, or theoretically stolen, from someone, and Rachel had a chalice that has been stolen from someone. Who did Rachel steal it from? She stole it from Laban. Who is Laban in this story? Who is Laban in the brothers' story? Who's occupying that role of the person who's had something stolen from them? Joseph, that's right. So here it's very interesting. We've turned things on their heads. It's quite unexpected that the person we normally think of as a righteous individual has decided to occupy the Laban role. If that's the case, that Joseph is occupying the Laban role, who is the Jacob role? Who's going to stand up to Joseph? Who's going to stand up to Laban? Meaning Joseph is Laban, so who's standing up to Joseph Laban?
Judah.
Judah, great. So Judah has become Jacob. And this is really the principle that we were beginning with the Judah and Tamar story, is that what goes around comes around. You, Judah, you caused your father this grief. You were the one who was the mastermind of this entire plot to rip Joseph away. You thought maybe your dad, he's going to be consoled at the loss of this son. What you didn't account for was the deep, deep love that your father had for Joseph, and by extension, his mother, Rachel. And you didn't account for the fact that he was going to be entirely consumed by his grief. So what goes around comes around, Judah. You're going to have to take on the mantle of Jacob and redeem the mistakes of the past. We saw those mistakes play out in Judah's private life with Tamar. Can those mistakes now be redeemed in his public life with the rest of the family? Here we go. So then Joseph, instructed his house steward as follows, in the chapter 44, verse 1. He said, fill the men's bags with food as much as they can carry, and put each one's money in the mouth of his bag. Why is he giving them their money back? Because at the end of the day, if your brother comes to you and he says, I'm starving, can you give me food? You don't charge him for that food. Anyway, he says, put my silver goblet in the mouth of the bag of the youngest one, together with his money for the rations. And he did as Joseph told him. With the first light of morning, the men were sent off with their pack animals. They left the city, not very far. They're not gone far. Yosef Amar, and Joseph said to his steward, come, get up, Redoif acharei ha'anashim v'isagtem. Get up after them, chase after them, and overtake them. Where else in the Torah do we have a chase after people because of something that has been taken and reaching and catching up with them? Where else do we have such a situation?
With Laban.
Right.
With Laban running after Joseph, Rachel, and the fam. And guess what? The exact words of Radoif, chase after, and Hisagtem, and catch up with them. Those are the words used to describe Laban getting after them. And Joseph instructs his family, he says, speak to, Joseph says to his steward, speak to these brothers, speak to these guys, and ask them, Lama shilamtem ra'a tachas tofa. Why did you pay me back with evil instead of good? Who speaks like that? Who speaks in this way? Why did you pay me back with evil instead of good? Who talks like that? Yeah, so it's Laban who talks like that. You'll remember that God says to Laban in a dream, don't say anything to Jacob, mitov l'ra, from good to bad. We noticed, by the way, that was the only time that we used that language of tov and ra since Eden. And now Eden, we had the tree being tov, which is to tell me that Eitadas being tov l'ra, tree of knowledge between good and evil. We said Laban don't speak about good and evil, and now we have Joseph occupying the Laban role, saying, why do you pay me back with evil instead of good? Another ra and tov, another Eden, another echo of Laban. Carries on the verses. He says, you know, this thing that you've taken from which my master drinks, he uses it for divination. Nachesh yenachesh bo. He uses it for divination. What else was used for divination? What other item that was stolen was used for divination? It was the teraphim. Everyone's right. It was the teraphim. And guess what? The language of Nachash, Nichashti. Nichashti is the word that Laban used to describe his divination, and Nichashti sounds like Nachash, sounds like snake. Once again, we have the snake coming through to divination, coming through to the divination of this cup. Laban's cup, Laban's teraphim, Joseph's cup, Laban's teraphim, the snake. Seeking knowledge that is too hasty, that is beyond me. Another comparison. Okay. So he overtakes them, and he says these words. And they said to him, what does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servants to do anything of the kind. How can it be? We would never do anything. But how could we steal such a thing? Who was described as stealing? That's Rachel was described as stealing. And then says Judah the fateful words. Whichever of your servants it is found with shall die. Fateful proclamation. Who else made such a fateful proclamation? Jacob made such a fateful proclamation. Whoever the teraphim is found with shall die. By the way, Judah also made such a faithful proclamation. She should be taken out to be killed. Tamar should be taken out to be killed, and he's the one who breaks that by owning up to his role. But in any case, it's the same proclamation that Jacob makes that faithfully destroys Rachel, destroys Joseph, almost destroying Benjamin right now. It's the proclamation that will bring the whole thing to its end. If Laban under the guise of Jacob, or if Laban under the guise of Joseph will play out this command, then Laban's curse will be fulfilled. Rachel will have gone, Joseph will have gone, and finally Benjamin will have gone. So you see the tension, you see the teraphim once again. Now the teraphim is back. The teraphim is not only in the world of Jacob and Rachel. The teraphim is not only in the world of Judah and Tamar. The teraphim is even in the world of Joseph and his brothers. What goes around comes around until there's a change. Until there's a change. And here we go. So now we come on to our purple highlighting. And this is the final redemption of the whole story. So Joseph starts to search. He starts searching. He began with the oldest and he finished with the youngest. By the way, what does that sound like? Starting with the oldest, finishing with the youngest. It sounds like Leah. You start with Leah, and then you move on to Rachel. Alternatively, if you're fixing the issues of Jacob and Esau, starting with the oldest this time. Now, who was the oldest in Jacob and Esau? It's not sure. But there's already now an ambiguity. Can we be rectifying the brother tensions of the past? Starting with the oldest, going to the youngest. Remember, Laban said this claim to Jacob. He says, Lo yasakein bimkomenu latet hatzi'ira lifnei habechira. We don't do that in our place, to put the younger one before the older one. Now Joseph, in the guise of Laban, he's starting with the older one, and he's going down to the younger one. Okay. What's the offer that Joseph makes to Judah? He says, listen, when we're now over here, when Judah and his brothers re-entered the house of Joseph, who were still there, they threw themselves on the ground before him. And Joseph said to them, what is this deed that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me practices divination? And Judah replied, what can we say to you, my lord? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? You know, we'll be slaves to you. We'll be slaves to you. Here's the situation that I'm just going back for 1 second. Here's the situation that Judah finds himself in. He says, what has been proposed is whichever of your Judah said, whichever your servant that is found with shall die. The rest of us shall become slaves to you. He's saying, you know, that's the situation. And he doesn't know at this point that it's Benjamin, right? So you can imagine, he doesn't think that anyone has got this cup. He can't imagine anyone of taking it. He makes this outrageous statement, whoever it is found with, the person shall die, because he doesn't know that Benjamin's got the cup. If he had known that Benjamin had the cup, he would never have said it. Just like Jacob, if he had known that Rachel would have had the teraphim, he would never have made the statement that you can just, whoever has the teraphim, they'll die. You would never have said such a thing. And Rachel never told him. If only she told him. However, Joseph replies, although what you're proposing is right, only the one with whom it is found shall be my slave, but the rest of you shall go free. Okay, so here's Judah's predicament. Here, let's play a game. Let's play deal or no deal. Okay, so here you are Judah, and you've been presented with the following bargain. Either you can all go home, Judah, Yissachar, Levi, everyone, you can all go home, you can all go scot-free. The only condition is that Benjamin has to be a slave, or we'll kill all of you, or, you know, like all of you will go. Deal or no deal? Deal or no deal? What do you say? Do you take the deal to leave Benjamin as a slave? Or do you take no deal, which is probably death? Deal or no deal, guys? What do you say?
So now all the brothers have come together. You've got unification.
Right, but they're all about to be all could be challenged to die. Because
but it's the same thing is happening to everyone. Instead of, we've been dealing so much with individuals.
1 second, but is it better that all the brothers should die, or just we'll leave Benjamin there as a slave?
It's just a lesson.
No, that you're faced with a predicament. You're Judah standing in front of the Grand Vizier of Egypt. The Grand Vizier of Egypt has offered you a deal. You said everyone should die. The Grand Vizier said, don't worry, not everyone has to die. Let me just take Benjamin as a slave instead of everyone dying. Deal or no deal?
But those brothers don't want Benjamin to die because they're worried about the father.
I understand, but he's not going to die. He's going to be taken as a slave. Taken as a slave. Deal or no deal?
You'd take it, wouldn't you?
You'd take it. You'd take it. You would. You know, Anthony's right. Anthony's right, because, you know, you would never want to cause your father that suffering. But hold on a second. The other option, the no deal option, is unfathomably worse. Not only does he lose Benjamin, he loses everybody. Right? So, you know, caught between a rock and a hard place, you'd say, look, I understand, Dad, that we promised you that we bring Benjamin back. But that stupid boy, he went and he stole the chalice of the Grand Vizier of Egypt. I mean, like, what could we do? The only option we had was to leave him as a slave. Otherwise, we would all be killed. That was the deal. Deal or no deal, you take the deal. Judah does not take the deal. Judah does not take the deal. He says no deal, and he's feeling what Anthony's saying. And there's a word that he uses. He says, "Man nidaber." What can we say to you? Uman nitzdadak. How can we be righteous? Where else has Judah used the word tzedek, righteousness, as a turning point in a story?
With Tamir, when he owned up that it was his.
Fantastic. When Tamar, he said, Sadka mimeni. She is more righteous than me. We are now seeing Judah and Tamar come together with Joseph and his brothers, and finally, we will have redemption. What righteousness do we have? Let's think about what is the role, what have we done here? And let's carry on reading, because what does Judah say? Vayigash elav Yehudah. Judah comes close to Joseph. By the way, Vayigash, that word to come close, is connected to this, is the same word that is used to describe how Jacob comes close to Isaac when he asks him to be felt. Geshena, let me feel you, let me touch you, come close to me. Now Judah, in the role of Jacob, comes close to Joseph. And he says the followers. He says, don't be angry. Don't be angry with your servant. He debases himself. He makes him the servant. If Judah is acting as Jacob, so now here, Joseph is acting as Esau. And Esau desperately didn't want to be the servant. So Jacob, in the guise of Judah, is saying, I'll be the servant. You're the master, I'll be the servant. He's turning everything on its head. He's redeeming that relationship. He's coming close. And what does he say? He says the following. He says, you know what? We told my Lord already, we have an old father. And here is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother. And his father, Va'aviv Ahevoi, his father loves him. His father loves him. And it says over here, dotes on him. It means he loves him. What has rocked apart these families? What has split apart these families? Since Abraham, since Isaac, since Jacob, it's been an inequality in love. There's been Abraham who had to get rid of Yishmael. There's been Isaac who has actually loved Esau more. And Rebecca who loved Jacob more. There's been Jacob who's loved Joseph more, stimulating the jealousy of his brothers. There's been an imbalance in love throughout. What's the most difficult thing for a child to own up to? The most difficult thing for a child to own up to is that they are not the most beloved of their parent. To say, Dad loves the other one more. What's Judah about to do? He's saying his tzedek. He's saying the righteousness. He's just saying the truth. He's just saying the truth. Just as he said the truth by Tamar, he's saying the truth by his very family. Dad loves this boy. And it gets even more intense. As we continue the description of what his father says, it says, your servant my father said to us, and listen to the words that Jacob recorded to describe his family. He says, Atem yedatem. Jacob said to his sons, you know, ki shnayim yaldali ishti. My wife bore me 2 sons. If you're Judah and you hear those words, it's like a dagger to your heart. What do you mean, my wife bore me 2 sons? What about the rest of us? What about my mother Leah? What about Bilhah and Zilpah? What about all the other boys? What about the 10 other children that you have? You said, you've just totally wiped us out from the family picture. My wife, my only wife, Rachel, bore me 2 sons, my only 2 sons. But you're telling the truth now, Judah. You're no longer ruled by jealousy. You're no longer ruled by the foibles of relationships that have bittered and soured. You're just telling the truth because you've got a higher value here, the value of a whole family, the value of a whole father. And remember, you said to your father, it was a collateral payment that got me out of my situation with Tamar. It was a collateral payment that forced me to face up to the truth. I'm going to be collateral, says Judah to his father. I'll be collateral for Benjamin. I will take his place. And that is what he says to Joseph. He says at the end of the day, therefore, please let your servant remain to my Lord. As in, please let me remain as a slave to you. I will be the collateral payment. I will guarantee Benjamin instead of the boy, instead of Benjamin, and let the boy go back with his brothers. Because you know what? There's something which is more important than me. It's my dad, and it's what he loves. Even if it hurts me to say what he loves is important, that is what I'm going to stand up for now. I'm just going to tell the truth and stand up for truth and be collateral payment to that deal. And here we finally have the end of this saga, because Joseph breaks character. Joseph stops being Laban and then starts being Joseph. Joseph could no longer control himself before all his servants, and he cried out, have everyone withdraw from me. So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Joseph takes off the costume of Laban and reemerges as a brother. He's seen that Judah can stand up for what is true. So too he can meet that truth with his own truth. And they cry. Joseph cries. And here he says, Yosef el achiv ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And they are reunited. They are reunited. And the story has now reached its redemption. That Jacob's world and the Teraphim of Jacob's world, link between the Teraphim of Joseph and his brothers, influenced by the Teraphim of Judah and Tamar, where Judah can finally stand up for truth. Judah can finally be what it means. He can finally, just as Jacob stood up to his demons, Judah on a personal level, Judah stands up for the demons of the past on a public level, first in his life and then in the life of his brothers, to own up to truth, to own up to tzedek, to what is true and right, and to finally end this trail of untruths, this trail of people who pass the buck of responsibility to others, who seek to grab a situation and to overtake a situation with divination. But instead, he just says, this is the truth. And so what is the final response? The final response is, at the end of all this, he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. They kiss and they hug and they are reconciled. And afterwards, only then were his brothers able to speak to him. They finally can talk to each other. Why is that so important? Because that's how the whole thing broke down in the first place. In Genesis 37:4, when his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more than any of his brothers, they hated him so much that they could not speak to him. They couldn't speak. They couldn't speak to each other. Finally, once again, the brothers can speak. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. So for me, if you want to know why Genesis is the first book of the Torah, it's because there's a powerful message that we have seen echoed from creation through to the very end of the whole family that is left to Jacob, these brothers that are finally reconciled. The message is like this. Judaism is all about perfecting the world. Judaism is all about making the world the most beautiful, best place it can be. The Sakin Olam B'Malchus Shakai, to fix the world under the sovereignty of God. All these commandments, all these laws, all these things that we have, we're meant to shine light into the world to make the world a better place. But where does it start? It starts by being a whole person and a whole family. You don't start fixing the world by just running out there, seeking out social action projects, seeking out charity, seeking out endeavors out there in the world without first making sure that your shop, so to speak, is in order, that your house is in order. You start by perfecting yourself. sorting out your own demons. Jacob did this by facing up to his own crookedness and coming out whole. But there were echoes left over, echoes where that wholesomeness wasn't felt outside of his personhood, outside of his psyche. You can have a very dignified person, but if the family is breaking down around you, that's no good. The next thing is not just to have truthfulness internally, it's to have truthfulness externally, truthfulness in my relationships, right? We saw that breakdown already from the very beginning in Eden, where Eve says, it wasn't me, it was the snake. And Adam says, it wasn't me, it was Eve. And they keep on passing the buck from one to the other, not owning up to the truth. And those deceits and those lies and those attempts to grab hold of truth and make it my own have riddled of each person has either repeated or done the opposite. Repeat, do the opposite, repeat, do the opposite, until we finally get to one man, Judah, who's able just to stand up and say, I'm not going to repeat, I'm not going to do the opposite, I'll just admit to the fact that I've made a mistake. I had a role here to play, and I want to make amends. The introduction to the whole Torah is learning that if you want to know what it is to shine light into the world, shine light into your heart, shine light into your family, tell truth to yourself, tell truth to other people, and in so doing, have beautiful wholeness in your heart, have a beautiful wholeness with your brothers, with your parents, with your children, and then you can go out and conquer the world. Thank you so much for chasing away the lullabies for this past season. It's been so moving, so wonderful.